So, a really warm welcome this afternoon, and particularly to you, Joe, for joining us. That's great. Nice to see you, and particularly as being someone who's just started being a mentor. I hope that this session is going to be really helpful and supportive to you. So, we're going to be looking at, as part of CPD 2, these elements on the agenda. So we're going to obviously share who Kath and I are, looking at the curriculum, our BCU IT curriculum, because if you haven't mentored before, it will help to support you to set those targets, which I know you'll be currently doing with your BA Year 3s and your PGs, to look at how we can support their development and progress. Then we're going to consider the critical incident, just having an update of what the evidence that our associate teachers are pulling together, and the quality of that evidence. And then we're going to be looking at assessing our associate teachers accurately using the BCU IT assessment tracker. So hopefully that will give you a little bit further insight on how to make those targets smart, that you're not only sharing verbally, but also that you're sharing in written format as well. So just to introduce myself, my name is Anne Whitaker and I'm the partnership lead. And Kath, do you want to introduce yourself? I think you're on mute.
Hello, I'm Kath Minott-Waller. I'm one of the senior lecturers here at BCU and working alongside Anne to develop our mentoring.
Thank you, Kath. Absolutely. This is a big year for mentoring, Joe. I'm not sure whether you are. We'll allude to that later on. This is, certainly supporting our associate teachers, but how that's going to change next year as well. So just to say, thank you for currently hosting PGCE. Associate teachers who are more than likely completing their school-based training 1, and our BA Year 3 associate teachers who are completing their school-based training 3, so their final placement before they hopefully graduate at the end of next year. We're also preparing for our BA Year 1 associate teachers to be going out into schools in January. And I should also add, as Kath is the BA Year 2 lead, we've also got our BA Year 2 leads who will also be going out into schools in January as well. And just to give this CPD some context as well, this links to the CPD 1 that we delivered a couple of weeks ago, and the PowerPoint presentation is already up on the website for you to have a look at as well. So if you're not aware, or your university tutor hasn't shared this with you, we have you can access the primary partnership website, which is a really one-stop port of call for you to access all of our documentation, and also hosts CPD like tonight's session and the recordings, which will be going live by the end of tomorrow on our website. So it's a really useful port, and if you can just click on the link, you should be able to access that a little bit further. I don't want to go into too much detail tonight, because in the previous session for CPD 1, I did go through the partnership website in a little bit more depth and detail. You might also have had, or your university tutor will be bringing into school, these 2 useful documents which we used last year to help to access our information a little bit more readily and easily in school, and to give you the process to go through, exactly how we are supporting, or you're supporting our associate teachers on their school-based training. And it gives a step-by-step guide to the processes involved. And again, if you click on the links of any of the presentation, the Mentor CPD and support, it will take you directly to the point on our website where you can access that information as well. So what we're going to look at today is thinking about how we're using the BCU IT curriculum to set appropriate SMART targets. Those targets are going to help to support our associate teachers to really develop their practice. And I know that for our BA Year 3 associate teachers particularly, I'm hoping that you're finding that, they're ready to have those more challenging targets to help to develop their practice. So one of the things that we looked at last time was looking at the verbal feedback that I'm sure you're giving, Joe, to your associate teachers, that initial in the moment feedback, following any observations or any conversations that you're having regarding their practice and development. Thinking about how you are asking those particular questions, how are you challenging, perhaps getting them to think about a different perspective and another point of view. I know when I was in school with my BA Year 3s on Tuesday, I think sometimes it's important for them to sort of appreciate and accept, the things that are going well in their practice, but also in their teaching, but also to develop perhaps some of the negative thoughts that they might have. They all seem to pick up on the negativities first, don't they? It's how you can change and make sure that they can see the positives of their practice as well. And that comes very much through the support. I know the mentors that I was working with, hugely supportive of the associate teacher and really giving that nurturing encouragement as well. I think there's a lot about confidence and being able to stand up and deliver a lesson which perhaps they don't feel confident about the subject knowledge, or perhaps they're not quite sure about some elements of their practice, and really having that constructive feedback is so important to help in their development. And also even though as a new mentor, but you've had experience as a teacher, all of the ways that you can support associate teachers, because some are coming with very little knowledge in this early part of their practice, particularly for PGs. But some of the BA Year 3s again may have some of that residual knowledge and that research-based knowledge, but it's how that it impacts on their practice and how that they can demonstrate that in their teaching. Let's go on to the next slide. So the other thing we looked at was really looking at targets, knowing what the associate teacher needs at this particular point to develop further. So, like all of us, we can have perhaps a number of areas to develop, but it's picking up on the bespoke elements that are really going to help to move the associate teacher on at this particular point, and perhaps where they need to be by the end of their school-based training. And I think setting those precise targets, and we're going to have a look at some examples of those, will really help the associate teacher identify, what their next steps are. We can really be clear about that. We can really give those progressional steps to make sure that they're not, that they can see it's not just a generic, you can, you need to improve behaviour, but how do you need to improve behaviour? What do you need to do to minimise that low-level disruption, etc. And one of the things, I don't know whether you've seen this or been signposted to these, and very, I think a lot of mentors have found helpful, is using our subject-specific prompts. And they, again, can be accessed on our partnership website under either the IT curriculum section or under placement documents. So these prompts are designed to help you to look at the subject-specific element of giving and supporting written feedback. And we're going to have a look at some examples a little bit later on as well. So I don't know whether you've had a look, or presumably, Jo, if you've had review meetings or you've got review meetings coming up with your university tutor, you will have been having a look at these are our principles as part of that underpins our BCU IT curriculum. You are great, you're aware of those. So obviously when you're looking at setting targets, and I know that when Kath and I are in school and other colleagues, we'll be looking at how when we're setting the targets on the observation feedback form, what the specific target feeds back to, which of the key principles it links to. So for example, I'm sure many of our associate teachers, particularly with PGs, will have a behaviour linked target, perhaps about how they're managing, lining the children up in the classroom, perhaps managing those transitions from the carpet back to tables, etc. So some of that target may be linked to theme B, or and we would expect that there would be also a target linked to theme C, which is their subject development, and that's where the subject specific prompts are very helpful in supporting that, to give that precise subject specific commentary in their target. I know this is a little bit small, but hopefully you can see that. If you click on the link, that will take you directly to the assessment tracker. And you might be familiar already with filling this in. This is an example of perhaps a PG or I would say hopefully a BA Year 3 might be completed, have some more of the working at columns completed. But this is a typical example that you might have of someone who has obviously, you've gone through the targets and the strands with the associate teacher, and they've been able to highlight and identify areas of practice they feel they have expertise in. And what some mentors do, and in association with their university tutor, some underline when they haven't quite met that target. I mean, I don't know whether Kath, yours do that, or we sometimes, there's sometimes we have red, underline it in red. But at the end of the point is that when you come to have that review meeting or the progress meeting, then it's very clear that you've identified that yes, they've met this particular strand and they've got evidence and can talk and deliberate that in discussion. Do you agree with that, Kath? Is that what you do?
Yes. I think mentors do different ways, really, isn't it? But once it is highlighted, I kind of count that as having achieved. And I think it's over the consistency of it, isn't it? They're kind of beginning to see it in practice, but it's not consistent, and they'd just like to see a little bit more evidence before they can sort of highlight it off fully.
Yeah, I think one of the themes that I've noticed with my mentors is that they are a little bit reluctant to comment on theme A, because I think that's more about the associate teacher taking ownership of research, but actually it's that conversation with the mentor as well, because I'm sure through CPD sessions associate teachers may be attending, they will also, they're still, their research informed practice will come through very much the school as well. I think that it is in discussion, but obviously I do find that some people leave that theme until, as a university tutor, you come and say, well, I'm not quite sure, have they done this? But actually it's about the associate teacher also taking taking a lead on that, but obviously communicating that with their mentor as well.
I think the subject specific development journal really supports that, because I've actually got some sort of doing training placements, whatever, for year threes at the moment, and because they haven't been through that process and they haven't got those development journals, it's you can also tell the difference there as well. So I think where they've got those development journals now, they are beginning to make those links between the two.
Yeah,
definitely.
And again, Jo, hopefully they're completing those development journals. I know there is an element of workload involved with that with our associate teachers, but I've said to all of the associate teachers I'm working with, you're concentrating on the subjects that you're either teaching or observing in school. You're not going to perhaps you're not going to be teaching all subjects in school at that particular point, but really it's about making those important links with what their university taught content, but actually how that links and how it maps into what they're teaching in school as well. And for as a mentor to see, oh yeah, I can see you've been taught about how to look at particular elements, or they're looking at how you can sequence I don't know, looking at historical elements, but you can actually make sure that it's about that conversation that you have with your associate teacher, which is pivotal. So what we then thought, and this is really linked, wasn't it, Kath, to our Ofsted inspection, because we, our mentors, our primary mentors, were absolutely amazing to share their opinions and conversations with Ofsted, how they felt they understood the curriculum, and they felt they understood how to how to engage with associate teachers and the various paperwork that we shared with them. But one area that was, and I think it's always can be a development point, is what does an effective target look like? How do we know what an effective target is? And for those mentors that might be CT mentors and have had the training, there's a lot of work that they've done around making, discussing effective feedback and how to give that verbal and written feedback. But one area that we are concentrating on this year is just to support our mentors with, what does an effective target look like? What is the element of the target? Why is that target being set, and how is that target going to be? So how is our associate teachers going to achieve that particular target? So to give an example of that, what we've done is we've looked at 3 specific areas of subject areas, and really pinning up and sort of picking up the colour coding, which I think if you've used our lesson observation form that we've revised, Joe, you will see that there is a colour coded section in when you're actually giving those that bespoke feedback as well. So how that works is in particular in if you look, for example, this is a PE example, so that the Y bit was they have to scaffold learning. How are they going to do that? And then what are the next steps going to be? How are they going to actually implement that target? So it's really thinking about very carefully. It doesn't have to be a long. I mean, think sometimes mentors feel they have to write a very long paragraph here, or a couple of sentences. It doesn't have to be that. I mean, it's just if you're giving too much information and you're giving too much content, our associate teachers are not going to develop that at all. They're not going to understand that. So it's really thinking about the what in green, the blue and why, and how they're going to do that, how they're going to achieve that. Again, for mathematics, again, to think about the what, to make sure they can think about aspects of addition, and then the why do they need to do it, to ensure there's that procedural knowledge, and then how they're going to do that. So I mean, obviously you don't need to colour code these, Joe, so don't think, oh gosh, next, I mean, every time I do a target I'm expected to colour code them. But I think we're just giving these examples as a way to think that it's quite a simple, it's a simple target, but it's a very effective target because it covers those 3 areas of learning. And again, for history, slightly longer thinking about, again, the what, to think about the context of what you're teaching, that historical context, what they need, why they need to develop that further, to look at, to give children secure in their chronological knowledge, but then how are you going to do that? So does that help, Joe? I mean, I think that's something that I've been trying to do, particularly more when I've been in schools supporting mentors with target setting, to think about that in that format. And I know when colleagues I've shared that with them, it's, oh yeah, that makes sense, because it really focuses you on the target you're setting, and not to make it too ambiguous or too wide, so that the associate teacher doesn't really understand what they want to achieve.
Definitely, thank you. I'm good. Just going to ask randomly. I don't know whether my camera is working or not. To be fair, is it not?
It's not, but we can hear you.
Sorry,
so that's fine.
I know I don't. I'm trying to mess with it, but I am here and I am listening. So I apologise that you can't see me on there. Sorry.
No, I think there was when I went into the universities, there's a link on the top you can make your camera visible, but not to worry, we can hear you. That's absolutely fine.
Good.
And then
Thank you.
And please chip in, if you have any questions. Absolutely great to support. So, but putting that into context, I think sometimes we can look at those specific subject targets, but then I thought it was quite useful to then share with you. And again, I've taken these from we got examples of our lesson observation feedback also on the website, which you can access. It's just to see how in that context the subject fits into other targets that might be set. And I think, again, some colleagues and yourself, if you think, oh yes, there's some, if I'm looking at maths no problem, or maths makes sense, or there's some element, there's a link, and perhaps some of your planning that you think, oh, that might be useful to signpost specifically to a particular point, it's absolutely fine to do that as well. So again, just trying to keep the targets sharp, but actually making them purposeful. So we're having that stepped incremental, I suppose, journey to supporting our associate teachers, and they don't get overwhelmed with too many targets that they can't really achieve at that particular point. Anything to add to that, Kath? I think we've covered the targets. I think it's about giving those examples and really having a go at writing them as well, and looking at the modelled examples from UTs as well when they come in to observe, to do that joint observation.
The only thing I would say is just also making that link back to the BCU key theme. So the ones that you've got on the screen at the moment. So we're linking it back to theme C and D, D and B, because I think sometimes they don't get linked back. Sometimes that's a bit of an omission. So it is just knowing where that falls within the themes, because obviously then that's underpinning or being underpinned by the teacher standards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes I've noticed that people probably leave those blank because they're not so au fait with our themes. I think, as you know, what we've tried to do very much this year with our mentoring and our mentoring support is it's business as usual. We try not to bring too many new things into the ring, because actually we want to consolidate and cement the work we had with our mentors last year in school, so that obviously if the curriculum's new to you this year, Joe, you're still getting to grips with it. So it's about making sure that we try and support if your UT's coming in, say, well, yeah, this is where it links to that particular theme, and to develop. You will our curriculum is good. It's not going to change drastically. It's just getting, I think, being more familiar with it as well. And again, this is an example of history. Looking again where you have those crossovers. Sometimes I think this can happen as well, where you have a subject specific, a subject target which links to maybe the delivery, a teaching, or the planning, or links to planning. So it's absolutely acceptable to be able to have the two. I think obviously I think one time somebody put about 4 different themes in the box of one that you're not going to embrace 4 different themes in one target. It's just about trying to be very, I think, specific in those themes that you're covering as well. Any questions on that, Joe? Anything else? I mean, anything you found? I mean, how have you found writing targets particularly? Has that been something that you might think, oh, I try to concentrate more on? Are you looking at that variety and the teaching? Obviously, planning and teaching and learning, the subject, and probably behaviour going to be the 3 key areas. But how are you finding that?
Not too bad, to be fair. We have focused on behaviour. It's quite, for my role, it's quite difficult because I've got a student, but then I'm also overlooking the other student, and then we've also got a third student that's come through you via Haybridge, so she's doing something completely different as well. So I've got the 3 of them that are all doing different things. So I'm sort of writing the targets for my student who's in year 6, then the one that's in year 2, and then the ones in year 1. They just join me on a weekly meeting. So we have an hour every Thursday, and I go through their targets that have been written with their teachers. So we seem to be okay on the target front. We've all kind of focused on behaviour, obviously, to start with. Subject knowledge as well is another one that's coming through. And then this week we've looked at differentiation and starting to look at assessment as well. So we're trying to keep, so we're all on the same kind of wavelength, but obviously as the teaching practices go on, they'll have different strengths and areas to focus on. But at the moment, they're the 4 that we've kind of looked at as a school. So
yeah, and maybe also about the delivery as well. That CPD, looking at how their pace of delivery, how they're using questioning even early, as straight away. It's about questioning is so pivotal, isn't it, to support and develop learning? So
definitely,
right. And obviously,
teaching styles was the other one. Sorry, so
right. So then linked to that, and linked to think about the written targets. So in order to support our associate teachers, so they, obviously they're using that written feedback and that verbal feedback very much for their, the development of progression on their school-based training, but also as part and a pivotal part of that discussion of practice is their critical incident. And I think a lot of, certainly when I've been going into schools, I hope you think this, Catherine, and perhaps Joe as well, is that our associate teachers, if as mentors, we remind them that they have, this is not just a piece of work they complete the night before. It's part of that. When you go into schools, you're introducing yourselves and obviously organising the associate teachers, thinking about this early on, and their first critical incident for PGs is looking at behaviour and thinking about how that how is behaviour being developed, that intent, the implementation, the impact of what how they're managing behaviour, how perhaps they've had that. What have they done to develop their practice in managing behaviours? Because it'd be quite challenging. I know a number of PGs have said that they thought that actually standing in front of the class, teachers make it look easy, and they hadn't appreciated, their presence, particularly their language choices. And I think dialect is wonderful. I'm all for dialect, but I don't like the goners and the causes and the, that slang language. And you
Yeah.
sometimes don't realise that you're using that until it's pointed out. So I think that has been one of the particular things that I've noticed with some of my PGs. Any information that you've shared, Joe or Kath, that you've seen some good examples? I've seen some good examples of books and shared, having a look at children's work. That's been really helpful in having those powerful discussions, but also thinking about what evidence they've used actually in their progress journal. Any snapshots of working walls or evidence again of pupil voice, etc. in books. What have your associate teachers used as evidence?
Do you want to? Have you got anything to add to that, Jo?
I was just going to say, for us, we as a school, we work on Seesaw. I don't know if you're familiar with Seesaw. So the students have been uploading all the work and any like photographs that they've done. If they've done like working walls or examples of that all goes on Seesaw. So that's quite nice because we can then monitor that from there. So I can have a look. I'll have a look this evening and look on. So we use Google Classroom as well. So anything that they've used, we can then have a look at on there. So anything that's done in books is then photographed and put onto Seesaw, so it's quite easy to then monitor what they're doing. I think for that, they're still, certainly my student is at the early stage. We've talked today about using mind maps and working walls just to support him with his lessons. So we're at that stage now where that's his next target, to be fair, to look at that. But you saying about the dialect as well, that's the one that's really come up for us. So they've all had like the target of making sure we were, not we was, and the dunno and yeah, those sort of things.
Them and those. That's the one that I pick up so much. Them.
What's that?
Them and those.
Yes. Yeah, it's
And
just the daft little ones, isn't it?
The was and the wheres. I think
Yes.
I picked up someone who said reckon rather than what do you think? What do you reckon? So but it's like Anne said, until you stand up in front of those children, you perhaps really not aware of your choice of words or how you speak or whether those endings, the better and the whatever they come with practice as well, don't they?
Definitely.
It's a bit like having that acting voice, isn't it? That's sort of the way that you speak as your teacher voice or your teacher presence. But I've noticed that, but I think, and the only way to find that out is if you get videoed. If that is something Iris Connectors is useful, that where it is can be quite useful. It can be quite horrifying, can't it, to look back and think, oh my goodness, did I actually say that? Because they don't realise they're doing it.
Yeah.
But I think as well that evidence in their progress journals, so they can put snapshots of evidence in there. So obviously when we come to those meetings, that we've had that rich discussion with the mentor, with the associate teacher about their progression and how the impact and how they've tried to link that to their research that they've undertaken, and also again, because it links very much to the teacher standards, how that links through our themes, which is the formative assessment approach to developing, to make sure our associate teachers are on track.
And that was one thing I was going to say, because we had just highlighted a little bit earlier about that, finding that evidence support key theme A and that reading and research. Those critical incidents are a really good way of getting the ATs to think about, well, how do you support that? What have you been away and read? What have you researched? How is that going to, what do you think you're going to do now? How can that inform your practice? So I think that's one really good way of making those links with that theme A and finding that evidence as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kath. So now looking at really that assessment process against the BCIT assessment track, and I think, Kath, this is probably over to you now. Do you want me to just shout and just say next, and I'll turn the slide over?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
I think this is sort of around how do we ensure that we are being robust in our judgments against those key themes, which is underpinned by the teacher standards, for as part of their summative assessment. So there's those 6 points of 6 assessment points at review meetings and progress meetings over the course of, and depending whether that's postgraduate or undergraduate. So for a postgraduate, those 6 assessment points are across those 3 placements in the 1 year, whereas with the undergraduates, obviously that's a review and a progress meeting or point every placement over the 3 years. But what we do need to do is just ensure that our judgments are accurate and understanding what those statements on that tracker actually mean. So whether we can actually say whether that we're seeing that evidence in practice, so that gives us that consistency across our partnership. So making accurate judgments with the available evidence, and if there isn't so much, like we'd said before, if it's underlined but perhaps not highlighted, it may be that there is some evidence, but you know, I would just like to see a little bit more before I can say yes, that's been achieved. So it's looking at judging over time across a range of evidence in order to make sure our judgments are accurate. Thanks, Anne. Would you like to move on to the next one? So what we've got on our assessment tracker, you'll see the 3 columns, and I think we've got an example or we've seen an example anyway, but the first one is a working towards, then we have a working at and a working beyond. And if you look and to see how those statements have been formed and broken down, you can see that development within particular aspects of practice. So really, just what does a working at, working towards, or a working at, or a working beyond associate teacher look like? Thanks, Anne. And what do they look like across those themes? So as we've said, theme A is about using that research to inform practice. B is that classroom practice, behaviour management, establishing effective sort of use of high expectations. Theme C is around that subject knowledge and subject specific pedagogy. Theme D around planning and assessing children, so to ensure, and so how is assessment then informing planning to move pupils on? E, adapt to implementing those effective adaptive strategies to support teaching and learning, and then F around those professional behaviours, so certainly underpinned by part 2 of the teacher standards as well. Thanks, Anne. So expectations over time. So we've got a working towards pupil learning and progress isn't always evident over time. Now, particularly with our first years and PG year, school-based training 1, their teaching only increases up to 40%. So we're not going to necessarily see that breadth across all themes in any great depth. So you may see elements of practice, elements of these points in practice. And I think it's also about observing others, team teaching, working together, planning together, and having those conversations. It's learning from those expert colleagues at this point. So some of these is about demonstrating through having those conversations in order that we can glean from them their knowledge and their understanding of what they're seeing and what they're sort of experiencing picking up in the classroom. So they must demonstrate working towards practicing most of the key themes. Part 2 consistently has to be of high quality anyway, and acts on advice and feedback most of the time. Thanks, Anne. So that's working towards. Now, working to act, that learning and progress, pupil learning and progress is evident over time. More consistently, perhaps over more than, you know, over the subjects that they're teaching. And then at least 75% of those statements are working out overall by, I think that's review meeting 3, isn't it, now with our year 3s and up.
Yeah.
So with our year 3s it would be, because they're at that point review meeting 3. Demonstrating established practice in most of those BCU key themes, all work towards judgments to be scrutinised. So I've sat through, you know, been supported some with review meeting 3 in this week, and so we've gone through those statements and actually talked about what do we think that looks like, what do we think that's asking of the associate teacher, and we've made some of those judgments together, and that's part of that standardisation process as well, and maybe even scrutinising some of the evidence that is there. So once they've talked about their critical incidents, for example, and they've shown a really good understanding of an element of, then we can have that conversation as well. And again, part 2, so that F needs to be consistently high, and they need to, at that point, be consistently acting on advice and feedback. And I've even had those conversations about, now it's that point where the ATs should really be taking responsibility for their own professional development, reflecting upon how their lessons are going, how that sequence is going, what progress the children are making at this point, so that they're part of the process. Certainly, I mean, you know, they're near qualified teachers, so that's really important. Thanks, Anne. Working beyond, so pupil learning progress needs to be good or better over time. So it needs to be consistently good or better than that for all groups of children, or the majority of groups of children within that classroom. At least 50% of those statements are working beyond overall, would mean that they've achieved that working beyond within that column. No working towards judgments should be outstanding. There may be 1 or 2 pockets within the working out, but I think that's probably more due down to opportunity than it is that it's not coming through in practice. Quite often there can be some slight barriers to how they can achieve some, particularly if it's around F and that wider school and parents and working with TAs, for example, if they're not, you know, in a classroom that have other adults there as well. So, and they have continued to act on advice and feedback consistently throughout in order to improve their practice. Thanks, Anne. And then, do you want me to talk about? So by the end of the course, so this is our year 3s using research. So we do need to have that summative assessment judgment made. So we don't use the teacher standards to formatively assess, but these are referred to now at the point of QTS recommendation. And so there is that key sort of added bit onto the bottom of each of the themes, and there's also a document at the end of the progress journal for year 3s to complete, where actually they're beginning to identify strengths and areas for development. So when they do go into, they're beginning to identify targets at that point, moving into their ECT years as well. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Kath, as well, because when, and probably Jo, when you know, obviously for your PGs, you're going to have them coming back to your school for school-based training 3. So
Yeah.
it's more that's the point when you'll be going through this in more depth. So your final progress meeting 3 with your PGs, you'll be looking at this in more depth and detail. So that, and I always think that's the time when it's, you know, really sitting down and working out with the associate teachers, as some people print the assessment tracker off and they highlight as they're going along, or, you know, it's having that conversation perhaps at the weekly meeting, or, you know, how that weekly meeting pans out throughout the week. I'm sure you're having lots of conversations with your associate teachers teachers. It's just making sure that I think what Kath and I is that accuracy of a judgment to make sure it fits. Thank you. I think theme C you've looked at as well, Kath, haven't you, with the subject specific development journal?
Because they've got they should be sharing their subject specific development journal regularly anyway at their weekly meetings, because that's the way we're making those links between our curriculum, BCU curriculum, and then what that practice looks like in the classroom. So it's, you know, we really want them to encourage them to be using those development journals, and colleagues in school to be having a look at that as well, because that gives you the context of seeing what they've done with us in university, and then how that you know, links to practice in your schools. So that should also be in their folders, and it should be readily available so that you can dip in and out of that as well together, because that will support many aspects of practice, particularly with a focus on subject knowledge and subject specific pedagogy as well.
Great, thanks, Kath. Do you want me to do this bit, or do you want to do this bit?
I don't mind. So what's this one for? SBT1 and for PGs?
Yeah. So what I've done, hold on, I'll do that. So what I've done here, Joe, is that I've looked specifically at in the progress journal, linking it to the review meeting. So you'll have probably had, you know, you've gone through the review meeting process, but I think it's about really making sure there's accuracy in those judgments that you've agreed with the university tutor and with the associate teacher, you know, those aspects of development that they're or progression where they've got at that particular point. So at midpoint, the review meeting one, you're more than likely they'll be hitting that working working towards you know, and they may only have some, maybe some of those strands. And I noticed that when I've been going into schools that you've picked up perhaps some themes, they have more elements of those working towards strands, but actually some areas they're not particularly. Maybe it might be in subject specific, their subject knowledge, or it could even be for theme E, looking at their adaptive practice. So it could be that there are fewer strands, but then we would only expect them to have some elements of those at this particular point. We're not looking for all of that 100% coverage, so that's really important. And it's also a point about looking at if they're on track at this point. So if we're looking at that end point going to be for school-based training 1, because obviously they have to pass, you know, to be successful, they have to meet the requirements and expectations of school-based training 1. And what do we do at this point if there are, you know, if there are gaps in their learning? I mean, I know if they perhaps haven't had any opportunity to teach phonics or guided reading, if they're, you know, that might be an area that they would, as Kath alluded to earlier, it's difficult to cover absolutely everything, but we would like them to be able to have that experience. It might be that that's a target that you'd be looking to develop further over the final few weeks of their school-based training. And then I'm linking it. Oh, it's not working. Link. Should close that. Oops. There we go. Sorry, just I've got something here which I can't get rid of. There we go. So then thinking about that end point. So obviously, Joe, the next point you'll be thinking of both your school-based your PGs and your BA year 3s. That end point, although for BA year 3s it's called school-based training 3, which I'll come to a little bit later. So it's just really looking at that point. So if they're not meeting, if there's a particular area that they're not, you know, they haven't shown enough progress in a particular strand, then we can set a rapid improvement target so that they will move into the next placement, but they may have areas that they haven't met sufficiently in order to have that, you know, that they haven't met enough in that working towards section. So that can be set for them. And again, it could be linked to obviously phonics as well. So if they haven't had enough, perhaps they haven't been able to teach phonics, or they haven't done enough observed reading, it could be that would be a target that would go into their next placement. So we can be assured that across the year they would have that experience as well. I don't know how you're feeling at the moment with the progression of your PGs. I mean, are they kind of on track as far as they've got some elements of those of the BCUIT assessment tracker completed?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I feel we're not doing too badly actually this time. So So yeah, I'm keeping a track on both of them, and there's definitely things that we've highlighted for
Good.
both of them at the moment. So yeah, they're both on track.
Good. And that's just getting used to the assessment process as well,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
and I think that
And I
progress
think it's just really important just say that it is 75% of that.
Yes.
They don't have to,
Yeah.
you know, ticked off or achieved all of it, because there are going to be some of those gaps in there, but about
Definitely.
75%.
and if they're not meeting that, obviously then they will be moving into another placement with a rapid improvement target, so that will help them to achieve, you know, to make sure that they qualify in their next placement to be able to catch up and you know and get themselves back on track as well. So it's very similar for the school-based training 3, of course, the review meeting. But I'm finding that, and I know Catherine, probably you are as well, Jo, that the quality of the evidence and the conversation for our BA Year 3s, we would be expecting them to be more advanced, to be able to articulate in a lot more depth and detail about their own reflections of practice, about the way they've used their research in their teaching, and can have that higher level discussion, so that, you know, we are really looking at that working at, because obviously to be able to meet the recommendation requirements of QTS, they have to have all elements of working at, so that there isn't, you know, if they've got some judgments that aren't having completed, the expectation is by the end of this practice they will have all to show and demonstrate.
And you do find that when they're talking about their critical instance, because I've had some Year 3s do that this week, and honestly the difference and the depth and the, you know, what they've gone away and what they've thought about and how they've put it into practice. And I mean, you know, different schools are using different schemes, read, write, ink or whatever, but they really feel, you can tell when they're talking about it now, and they're talking about perhaps individual children and groups and things like that, and how they've adapted it. There's, you know, there's certainly a difference and depth into there when they're talking around different aspects, definitely.
I mean, I've had one this week looking at assessment and looking at, you know, the links between summative and using formative assessment in their daily teaching, then how that links to summative assessment, and really getting a much better handle on understanding how that process works and how they assess in the moment in their learning, in their teaching, and how they use that assessment to help to inform their planning. So yes, absolutely much greater depth in their knowledge and understanding. And then finally, looking at, you know, that from that review meeting, going to the progress meeting. So this is again, Jo, when we have that conversation about, you know, where do they sit within the within the working at, but have they completed, you know, looking at then we assess against the teacher standards to make sure they've met those teacher standards. And if they haven't, obviously then that's another process about how, you know, they will have failed SPT 3 basically. So we kind of having that review meeting at that point, at this point now, is critical, isn't it? Because we can see if there are any gaps or there are any points where they're perhaps not meeting at this particular point. You know, that will be, it's about them and yourselves be able to put in place. So, well, yes, you know, you've identified the targets, the next steps, but you've got the rest of this practice to really show that development. And you can see a lot of improvement in associate teachers, you know, even within a week. Kath, I've been in, you know, 2 weeks. It's amazing on how they continue to develop from that.
And I think it's important that, you know, the place of the rapid improvement target at that point, well, before that point, so at the review meeting, because actually we do need to see that rapid improvement really quickly, and there shouldn't be any surprises at this point, should there? So
absolutely. So just to kind of mention, what about the failing associate teacher? Because you know, it does happen at some point, you know, and hopefully it's not going to happen with you, Jo. You're going to have people who are going to be successful, but fingers crossed. But it is, you know, it is. I mean, there's so many different things can happen, can't there? I mean, I've had, you know, some people have had, there can be many circumstances, but actually it's about really if I think we pride ourselves in the quality of our teachers. We obviously, if they're not meeting those standards and we don't feel they are, we're not going to pass them. They have to actually accept that there is, by the end of the placement, if despite the rapid improvement targets that have been put in place. I mean, it's very rare for that to happen, Kath, isn't it? At that point that we get to that point we fail. That usually happens prior to that, to be honest. But actually, it's about there is a process and we have procedures in place to support that. Making those accurate judgments. Again, we talked a lot about this earlier. There's evaluations of practice, the observations you have, the linking to that planning, and I'm hoping that you're seeing a better quality of planning, particularly from our BA Year 3s, and that sequence of learning, planning for a sequence of learning. We've done a lot of work last year in supporting our associate teachers to really think about, you're not just planning a lesson in its in isolation. How does it link in that sequence of learning, and really getting a range of evidence, I think, to support judgments as well, is really critical in our judgments as well.
Could I just ask a quick question?
Yeah,
Sorry,
sure.
on the planning.
Yes.
When the tutor comes in, will he want to see your planning format? Because I only ask because at our school, our head teacher likes them to use our format, and I think she's gone through that with David. But I do worry a little bit because I've seen like the progression within the subjects, which looks really good, but our head teacher likes them to use our different planning formats. Is that still okay for them to use ours?
Is that for the BA Year 3, or is it for both PGs
Both.
as well?
Yeah, both of them.
I mean, one of the things we were completely taken that the point about the school wanting to use that particular planning. For us, it's as long as it's developed, because we want to show, certainly for our PGs, to have that understanding what the planning process looks like and how to actually plan it. If it's got those similar elements to ours, I think we would say, well, actually, it's about having some the associate teachers can look at and reflect on and evaluate. And I know that probably when we get jobs, we're not expecting that level of planning detail.
No,
However,
exactly.
it's important when they're learning, because we need to know if they can actually plan and if they can actually go through that process. That's really, a discussion that I'm sure you can have with the UT, but that's the philosophy, the rationale behind having that planning. I mean, obviously, when they come back from school-based training 3, if we are confident that the associate teachers are really good at planning, they understand that planning process, then by all means they can use the planning process in school. But I mean, so you do have a short-term planning format, do you?
Yeah, it's quite, to be fair, it's quite detailed. It's probably more detailed, if anything, than yours. So it's almost like it's not the one that we use as teachers. It's one that we would use for like observations and things like that. So it has got similar things on, but it's just not the exact same format. But it's worked so far with them. I just worry that it's so detailed that they're going to spend all their time planning. And it's just going to stress them out a little bit, because that is the hard part, isn't it? Whereas we know that when you become your own teacher, you're not doing one of those for every single lesson for every single day. So
I think it's just showing, demonstrating they understand the planning. The principle is, do they understand the planning process? Are they, have they got those questions? Have they got, are they using the correct vocabulary, terminologies, the subject knowledge? Do they have the timing? It does, yes, obviously, we wouldn't expect them to be doing that for once you're teaching 80%. It's just not practical. It's not, and it's workload for our associate teachers is not it's not applicable. But we would expect to see a plan when we're coming to observe, when that one, because at the moment we're seeing that one observation, that joint observation. We would expect to see a plan for that particular lesson. Yes.
Okay, so for the final year student, then she doesn't really need to plan for every single lesson. Is that what you're saying? Because I do feel for her that she's 80% of the time is a lot, isn't it?
Well, as the university tutor, I'd be recommending that they would be having a look at the planning, because if they have said that they have to plan, that's not our expectation. The expectation is they would plan for the lesson. When the university tutor comes in to observe their practice, we would definitely expect to have a full plan, and built into that sequence of where does that lesson fit in with the sequence, but not for every lesson. That, I mean, she will have some planning that she'll upload to her OneDrive, but that could be on the school's format.
Okay, I might go back and then have another rethink on that, because I think we're just making them, they are doing our school like observation one like yours for every single lesson that they're
Every time.
teaching.
I mean,
Yeah.
what do you think, Kath, on that? What would you recommend?
I think by the time, I think we're talking about sort of depending on where they are in their training, aren't we? I think to
Yeah.
begin with, because they're not teaching, they're only building up to that 40%.
Yes.
Then, and we recognise that planning takes an awful lot longer when we're only sort of beginning, doesn't it? So,
yeah.
and I think actually the format, and whether it's yours or your very detailed one, as long as it takes them through that process of understanding what good planning looks like, and I don't mean as in what does the piece of paper look like, is it going to do the job? Because actually any plan is about, is that going to have an impact on what's going on in the classroom, isn't it? I think for those, what we want to avoid is, because then they get into school and go, well, they only plan by using their PowerPoints or their whatever, whereas actually that's not taking them understanding that really careful planning. I think if they're at the end, school-based training 3, and you're really satisfied with their planning, they can go to the school planning. Now, I know you're saying it's more detailed, so I would still be a bit reticent about that, because it's about workload.
Definitely. No, I agree on that.
I think, Jo, are you saying, Jo, it's are they doing it for each of their lessons? They're using that detailed plan for each of the lessons that they're teaching, or is it just for the ones that they're being? So,
no,
so if you were observed,
it's
no,
every lesson. So it's, as I would say it's on a par with yours. So I don't think it's any more detailed, but when it's just to put it in perspective, you know how detailed yours are. So they are doing that for every single lesson. So when you've got 4 lessons a day that they're teaching, pretty much in the end, it's too much, isn't it? Really,
that's too much. Yeah, definitely.
So they could just put it on a weekly plan.
Yeah, there's a difference there as well, isn't there, Jo? If you're using that, you use it once every because
when we're observed.
There's a requirement there as well, isn't there? But you're not using that every day, are you?
No, definitely not. I wouldn't be able to. It's unmanageable. That's why I'm asking,
we've got to think about their workload and where they're better putting their efforts. As well, haven't we? So I mean, I've had a school before, to be fair, who what they've done is, yes, they recognise the workload, but they've then had a separate planning expectation for ECTs.
Right.
So they would say that those on SBT3 would then go on to their ECT planning, which was more detailed than their general school planning, but it wasn't so onerous that the workload was too huge. So it was kind of another way of doing it, and they said, well, every new teacher and every ECT would start using that anyway. But it wouldn't be as detailed as ours. So it was kind of a middle way as well.
I will look at that then. I'll make that priority, because
especially if I think your PGs, it's different, Jo, isn't it? Because they're not teaching as much and they are building into but I think certainly if you be a year 3, I'm sure they would appreciate that that it is about that delivery. It's about you can tell a planned lesson, but it's actually the content and how it's delivered, and are the children making progress? Is it a well planned? Is the details, is the subject development in there, is the progression in there for the pupils? But it doesn't have to be an in-depth planning sheet that could be produced. I do think that you need to look at that. So thank you for, I think that's a really good point to bring up. So thank you for definitely bringing that up.
Good. Thank you.
Great. So then finally thinking about, obviously, just go to the next, what's happening? Seems to be strange. Just knock that on. Just any feedback, Jo, which I think we've probably had. I think the feedback about the planning has been quite important. It's probably a good discussion to have. And I would certainly bring that up with your university tutor if they're coming in. Maybe get in touch with them quite quickly. I think on that, just to reassure the BA Year 3s. I think they will be probably feeling very overwhelmed with that. But
I did speak to her today in the meeting, and she was saying that she's stopping to 5:30 doesn't sound that late, but when we finish at 3, she's stopping till 5:30 just to mark her books to then go home and plan. And I think that's a lot. So we're sort of trying to support them as well on the all of the marking of the books. If she's delivering that many lessons, that's unmanageable, isn't it? So
yes, absolutely. And I would also say that if the quality of her planning is good, then she's already demonstrating, or she's demonstrating she understands the process. It's about making sure that when she's being observed, she uses either if the head is saying use your format, and it's similar to ours, and I wouldn't personally have a problem with that, but obviously I'll just check with the UT. I think that's a very sensible approach.
Okay.
So just to say thank you very much for joining tonight. I hope it was quite helpful to you, and it's really lovely to meet you. And
thank you. Sorry, my camera doesn't seem to work.
Don't worry.
Okay.
Sometimes my mic doesn't work. Sometimes my camera doesn't work. Very rarely do I get both.
Can I just say though, Jo, it's really nice to have, I know there's only one of you on here, but it is really lovely to have that conversation with our colleagues in our schools, because actually that gives us things to think about as well, and having those really quality conversations really. So thank you very much.
To be fair, I could talk for hours on it, because I think if you speak to David Grice, I have emailed him quite a few times on lots of different things. Anything that comes to my mind, I'll just email him and go, can you just answer this question?
But that's really great, and that's what we want. So please don't feel like you're taking it and too much amount of time, because actually it's about how we can support our ATs in your schools, isn't it, as well?
So want to get it right.
And it's giving you the confidence as well, because you obviously have a great passion for supporting. I think our associate teachers are lucky to have somebody who obviously wants to support them and make sure that they are successful on placement. So thank you so much, and great to see you as well. So look forward to hopefully seeing you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.